Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. So President Cyril Ramaphosa says challenges facing Eskom are both structural and operational. This is just one of his replies in yesterday's question and answer session in Parliament. Now, MPs grilled Ramaphosa on Eskom's woes and the withdrawal of perks for ministers, among many other things. And now, as the year ends, let's take stock of how Parliament has actually done in holding the executive accountable, including the President himself. For that, let's bring in the good party's Herron. Also joining us is the IFP's Chief Whip, Narend Singh. To both our guests, good morning to you. Thanks very much indeed for making time. It's lovely to have you on the program. You know, the opposition will always believe that more can be done by the President. But as a start, I wonder if we can take stock of whether or not we feel Ramaphosa has reasonably been accountable to Parliament now that his last Q&A session is behind us. Narend?
Good morning, Ayanda.
Sure. I was hoping to get your first take on that question. Has Ramaphosa been reasonably accountable to Parliament in the year gone by?
Well, good morning. Good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to your viewers, and good morning to my colleague, Herron from Good. Well, as you say, opposition parties will always say that, we don't have enough time to question members of the executive. And with the particular regard to President Ramaphosa, I think the challenge that we have, and it's something that the IFP has been pushing for a long time now, in fact for the last 20-odd years, is a portfolio committee to oversee Vote 1, the presidency. Now, at the moment, we don't have such a portfolio committee, and there are large amounts of the budget that are allocated to the presidency that are not accounted for in a portfolio committee. So it's quite coincidental that today the Rules Committee will be considering a report of the Subcommittee on Rules where I motivated that we must have, it's a constitutional imperative that we must have a committee to oversee the presidency. In that way, members of Parliament who sit on that committee will be able to interrogate that budget more than we can do when the President comes to the House. And as you would know, the President comes to the House 4 times a year. There's 3 hours for 6 questions. And yes, we could do with more time. And I think Parliament's got to find additional mechanisms to hold not only the President, but to hold other members of the executive accountable for the billions of budget that fall under them.
Yeah, you talk about time constraints. What obviously doesn't help is that in some instances, it's MPs' behavior that eats away at that time. We'll speak about that in just a moment. Brett, part of what we've also experienced this year, a unique experience, is all the information we've heard from the State Capture Commission of Inquiry and ways through which Parliament can play its role. In fact, some people might say Parliament has been on trial this year, given what we've heard about their lack of, rather the ways in which they've failed to hold the executive accountable. Do you reckon that has improved, given what we've seen unfold in the year gone by?
Well, I think that the Parliament will begin to deal with the state capture report in the coming months. Now that the President has tabled his response to it, I think that the role of parliamentary committees can be strengthened. They are the sittings of committees take place often, but they are dominated by presentations by departments with very little opportunity to really drive a new agenda or to interrogate the executive in a way that you can uncover how progress is being made. So I think that the way parliamentary committees operate is not really a conducive way to exercise oversight over the executive and government as a whole, because the interrogation of performance is limited by the way in which committees operate, with presentations being made, and then questions to the executive, which is the minister usually who attends these meetings, or the deputy minister. The style in which those questions and answers are provided sort of undermines the role of MPs and opposition MPs and their opportunities to hold the executive to account properly.
That's interesting. What do you mean by that? I mean, if we were to change it, for instance, what are some of the immediate alterations you would make?
Well, it's the style in which committees operate. So, for example, the chairperson will take a round of questions from all the members And then the executive really gets to pick and choose how they respond to those questions. If you look at other parliamentary systems and committee systems in other legislatures, there is a direct question and answer between a member and the executive. And so the executive can't, in those instances, avoid answering the question. But when you take 15 members and give each one of them the opportunity to ask a question or two or three, and then leave it up to the executive and or their heads of department or DGs to respond, the responses are often fudged because they will leave out parts, they don't respond directly. So it's not that I'm asking for cross-examination, but that style that you see in other committees and other legislatures, where members of parliament ask direct questions to the minister responds directly back, that leaves little room for evading answers or questions.
It's interesting that you're saying it's not cross-examination, because I think that's exactly what we all imagine might ultimately take place, this back and forth between the member of the executive and the MP in question. But I guess that's food for thought. As we try to think about ways of improving how Parliament and these committees work, Narend saying, there's also going to be real question and scrutiny around whether or not MPs themselves have done enough to follow the detail so that they're asking the right questions and are able to press the executive in that way. Insofar as that is concerned, and I know in some ways it's ironic that I ask you as an MP whether or not MPs have done well, but perhaps you'll be honest enough to give me your take about whether or not enough has been done by MPs to follow the detail and ask the right questions.
Yeah, I think, Ayanda, that's a very good question. And by and large, I think yes. You see, the thing is, when the public think about MPs asking questions, they generally think that all 400 or maybe 350 members will ask questions in every committee. But you find that members of the ruling party get briefings from the ministers and the directors general even the evening before meetings. So they have what is called study groups. So it's left to members of the opposition. And as my colleague Brett had said, it leaves very little time for members of the opposition. Yes, we do research. We ask searching questions. We use the mechanisms that are available at the moment, which is written questions, oral questions. But we have to change the way we do this, because it should not be that the ruling party gets a major share of the time because they have the largest number of members in parliament. In fact, it's the opposition that should be asking those searching questions. And then hopefully, as we move forward and arising from the recommendation under commission, we as part hold the executive to account. And as colleague Brett says, I think the operative words, ministers usually attend these committees. Not every member attends these committees. And you find members not attending executive committees. We need to spend more time in committee rather than debating in parliament. And I think that's where we lose the plot. Because if we spend more time in committee, which are also publicly broadcast, then we can interrogate the ministers and members of the executive quite sharply on what's happening within their respective portfolios.
Yeah. So that's the executive's behavior. Let's speak about MPs' behavior. In fact, yesterday, many might say it was one of the calmer Q&A sessions we've had in quite a while. In fact, there was no heckling, at least not from what I've been able to see. No major disruptions, no rules being read to anyone about how to behave in the National Assembly, as if we're not already clear about that. Brett, I mean, in what ways can MPs hold each other accountable for that? Because we have seen many instances where even though for instance, those disruptions can be seen as some kind of political tool which has its place in Parliament, there are some people who feel it's destructive, especially in a context where we press for time and people want pressing questions to be answered.
Well, I mean, there's obviously an old tradition of what they call heckling in Parliament, which is an opportunity for members of the Parliament to in a reasonable way, to demonstrate their displeasure or their lack of trust with a response that is being provided in Parliament or a speech that's been made. But yes, yesterday was a very, I would say, I actually sent a message to someone saying it's a very relaxed Parliament yesterday.
Yeah.
It may be because the year is kind of petering out and people are tired of performative conduct in the House. But I think what maybe the public doesn't see is that there are consequences for members of parliament who breach the rules and are removed from parliament by the speaker or the chairperson of the sitting. There are committees that deal with that removal and to assess whether the removal was an appropriate response from the speaker. And the members of parliament that serve on those committees and get to assess whether that decision by the speaker was reasonable are exercising oversight over each other. So we do exercise some oversight over each other through a process that's maybe not well known in South Africa, where we assess the conduct of those members and we indicate as members of parliament to serve on that committee whether the ruling by the speaker was appropriate. So, and whether the conduct should be referred further. So yes, there is oversight. And surely, and I understand South Africans would like members of parliament to behave better. And that's our role as members of parliament, is to hold each other to account, and we do.
Certainly hope so. As we round up our discussion, Narend, of course, much has been said, much more can still be said. As far as the IFP is concerned, what are still some of the, let's call it unfinished business that you reckon the executive still needs to account to? Perhaps just a point or two in a context where we are spoiled for choice about where we can begin in getting more answers around the myriad of issues that have made it to the public domain this year.
Well, one of the issues that the IFP is going to be vigorously pursuing, even if it means going to the Constitutional Court, is the contents of the recently passed expropriation bill. And I think here we will be going to court on that one because we feel that parts of that bill are unconstitutional. The other bill, which I think has evoked a lot of public interest and to which the IFP also objected in Parliament, was the Electoral Laws Amendment Bill.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many barriers to entry for independents who have been required, or the court has said independents should be allowed to contest 2024 elections. There have been so many barriers to entry that we feel that that law as well is unconstitutional. But here again, you find that, members of the ruling party would blindly support what's on the table because it comes from the executive. And until we, as members of parliament, all 350 of us who are not in the executive, start separating the executive from MPs and realize that there's a role for parliamentarians which is separate from the role of the executive, and that we should not play party politics in Parliament, although we have party views, then only I think Parliament can play a more meaningful role on behalf of the millions of citizens in South Africa.
One certainly hopes so. Narend Singh, IFP Chief Whip, and Brett Herron, an MP with the Good Party, to both our guests. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Really